Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, it's Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's in the fight capital of the world, Las Vegas. Danny Segura, repping the 305, the 754. The 9.4, the 786. He's down in, no, not South Florida. He's in Colombia. Lucky you, man. And finally, the MMA media titan is back. Mike Mon from Toronto, except I think he's in Vancouver. So this whole thing's a mess. To top it off, we have a pantsless producer named Cold Coffee who's doing the ones and twos. It's time to just get to it. All right, guys. It was big news from the big fella this past Tuesday when former UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou ended his free agency and signed with the Professional Fighters League. Aside from the lucrative terms to compete, we're hearing high seven figures. He also got the following: 2 to 3 fights, and then he's free again. A split from the event's net profits, a signing bonus and or salary to serve as a brand ambassador for the PFL, the right to have his own sponsors in the cage, you know how it is, non-exclusive with regards to boxing, no champions clause or extension, so he's not tied down. He wanted his freedom. And a minimum salary for his opponent. Get this, we've heard 1 to 2 million, but more from the 2 million side. So that's pretty big. All right, there's a lot to unpack here. Give me your reaction to this landmark deal. What stood out to you the most? And we're going to go to Mike Bond for the first take.
Yeah, good for Francis, right? That's the first reaction. He made it pretty clear from well before he finished his UFC contract that there were certain things that he was looking for, whether it was to stay in the UFC or what he would explore in free agency. And it seems like he ticked a lot of the boxes for what he wanted. I understand there's a lot of dynamics with this in terms of like the fans and how they feel about fights that they're missing or fights we may be in store for within this PFL deal. But when you run down the terms there, George, how can you be critical really of like what this man got? This is a exceptional deal that I'm sure any fighter in the sport would love to have for themselves. It's just kind of some of the other optics and stuff I understand that we'll get into where things creep in. But you run down this, I mean, what's there really to criticize here on the behalf of Francis Ngannou, who is a man of his principle through this whole thing? He did it the right way. He followed his process and what he thought was right for himself and using the leverage he did have. I mean, this is great news for him. I mean, if we go to the question that's at the ticker at the bottom there, is this a game changer for MMA? That's, I think, where there's a lot more unknowns about, right? Like Francis Ngannou had the opportunity and the position to get a deal like this for himself. I don't think you're going to see a lot of other people be able to be in the same situation and be able to leverage it the way he has. So I don't necessarily know if it's going to be a game changer for the sport as a whole, for all these free agent things like that. But for Francis Ngannou, he maximized his position, and all you can do is just kind of give him a round of applause for that.
Good stuff. All right, Goes. Channel yourself to last Tuesday when you heard the announcement and everything that came with it.
Man, I was pretty shocked. I mean, it seemed like he got almost everything that he asked for. And really what you got to do is, I guess, you got to look at it from his eyes, right? What makes him happy? He's already been a UFC champion. He's a guy that a lot of people consider the best heavyweight. He's got a win over Stipe Miocic, who's probably another guy that gets put in that talk. So he got a lot from PFL that makes him happy. But what stood out for me the most in this negotiation that I thought was kind of brilliant was he got his money before he had that boxing match. Because no matter who you are, right? If we're throwing around this is the baddest man on the planet, he goes to boxing and he gets tooled up. I'm sorry, if he were to come back to the UFC after that, I would imagine that whatever his deal is, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller because people are going to have that image of who we are calling the baddest man on the planet getting, defeated by a boxing guy and probably not looking too well in the process. He negotiated his purse before all that. So it almost doesn't matter what happens in boxing. Regardless, he comes back to the PFL and he makes big money. He makes money for other fighters. He's done a lot. And like you guys alluded to here early on, yeah, I do think this will change MMA a little bit. And if it doesn't, maybe it's a little bit of a spark that will start to do that, because you see other moments in MMA history where things like this happen, where certain fighters start to get pay-per-view points and what happens, right? The next guy's asking for the same thing. So we may not see it right away, but I think little by little, things will start to happen. And I think it's these free agent heavyweights, right? Or guys that have 1 fight left on their contract, 2 fights left. They're salivating because if you look at his timeline, 2 fights, you get that done, become a free agent, you might have a really big payday waiting for you.
All right. How about we go down to South America and get some takes from Danny Segura?
Yeah, clear win for Francis Ngannou. Same reasons that Mike Bond mentioned. Like, you just look at the contract and it seems he got everything that he wanted and more. There were some things that maybe he wasn't thinking of, like PFL Africa and stuff, and he still got stuff that he's very passionate about. I guess what I'm wondering, and I don't want to like rehash the points about this being a huge W for Francis Ngannou, but I'm just kind of wondering if this is going to be a huge win or even a win at all for PFL. And obviously there's a lot of exposure. We're talking about it right now, just having Francis Ngannou attached to the brand. And of course, when he eventually fights, it's good. But is it worth everything that they gave in that contract? Because remember, it's a power relationship between the two parties. And obviously Francis Ngannou is a very big figure and very well known, very respected. And I'm sure he does all right in pay-per-view with the UFC, but I'm wondering if under the PFL structure, if that's going to carry over. So I'm just curious to see how this all plays out. Again, clear win for Francis Ngannou, but for PFL, I think it's still a wait and see game. We'll see how this whole thing shakes out and how big these fights are come 2024.
You're right, because we got to wait till 2024 for the MMA side, and 2023 is supposed to box. And as we've all seen, those boxing matches have yet to actually materialize. There's a lot of rumors out there. There's so-called, negotiations or chatter, but nothing seems to be firm. And already the chat's lighting up. If you come strong with a good comment, I will include you in these. If you got something dumb to say, I might either jack you up or just ignore it. So it's up to you. But here, let me start off right here with this one. He says, Big Ben 316. Francis went to a place where there are no fights. Doesn't make sense at all. Look, possibly, I get it. Yes and no. There's not really any big names there. Technically, Fabricio Verdum is there, right? But he's 45. He's past his prime. But maybe that's a way to. I think we've all realized that there's good fighters everywhere, and there's some UFC fighters that have gone there and haven't done well. So let's not shortchange them altogether. But he does have a strong point. We're talking about the biggest, baddest man on the planet who was supposed to do a trilogy with Miocic, maybe fight Jones, just beat Cyril Gane, the interim champ. Like that is a step down. I get that. So I'll give him that. But here's a dumb one. Simo 313. Francis ran from John Jones. Money is nothing when you have no legacy. Man, there was this overlap in time where John Jones could have fought Francis Ngannou. And remember, it took him 3 years from the time he vacated light heavyweight till the time he actually fought. There was a long time to get jacked and ready for heavyweight. I don't see it that way. I see it as John Jones also had an opportunity to fight Francis Ngannou. So I think that comment is unfair.
It's beyond silly too, right? Because money is nothing when you have no legacy. How many fighters leave the sport with nothing? Right? I'd rather have one or the other. Money is actually the one thing that you should leave the sport trying to have, because people like this and other critics are not going to care about your legacy, because the next heavyweight's going to come along and he's going to defend the title a few times and they're not going to care about you anymore. So getting your money and securing your bag and all that stuff should be number one priority over all these things. But the UFC life and certain things of the sport have conditioned fans into thinking this way, that Francis Ngannou should fight John Jones for $10 or something just to get his legacy secured and stuff. And I understand he had a huge money offer from the UFC there, but what people don't seem to connect as well with the offer that the UFC did give Francis Ngannou. Yeah, it sounded like that big number, the biggest heavyweight payday ever, Brock Lesnar, all that stuff. People aren't understanding that if he had lost that fight to John Jones, his contract goes all the way down to an entirely different structure at that point. And I'm guessing Francis Ngannou, the deal that he probably struck himself for PFL, if he does lose that first fight somehow, he's still going to be paid handsomely for the second fight or the third fight or whatever's on there. So I don't necessarily think that's the right way to look at this.
And if it makes money, it makes sense. Like this is prize fighting. I think if I were to, ask who was it, Big Ben, or what was this guy's name?
Simo 313.
or really anybody watching this or on the chat, would you rather have people think that you're cool or millions of dollars? Like, and so like the whole legacy thing is, to me, it's kind of silly. And also I think what people are missing is that Francis Ngannou is creating legacy, maybe not inside of the cage. Obviously, a fight with John Jones would be huge, and if he beat him, it would do wonders to his legacy. But he's also doing legacy stuff outside of the cage with this PFL deal. I don't want to compare him exactly like Muhammad Ali because that was obviously more political, but you can make a legacy outside of fighting, while you're a fighter. Right now, becoming a free agent, while champion, like this is unprecedented stuff. Getting a huge deal with PFL, this adds to his legacy. Whether it's outside the cage, it still adds to it. So I think people miss that point. But yeah, shouts out to Francis Ngannou. I mean, he gambled on himself, and it clearly paid off.
Goes, you wanted to chime in?
Well, I was just going to say, like Mike said, if he loses that first fight in the UFC, not only does his contract get restructured, but he's in a situation where he doesn't have his freedom. And, let's be honest here, guys, like he is not one of the favorites over at the UFC. They probably don't like him for everything that he's put him through. So what happens then? You get shelved, you get fights you don't want, you have to go places you don't want. I think there's that just doesn't make much sense. And, you look at Gorgeous George and myself, we're both wearing Manchester United stuff right now. Danny Segura, what are these sponsorship contracts that happen for some of these elite fighters that go international the way a Francis Ngannou does? We don't even know what he's going to pull on the sponsorship side, and he negotiated that in his contract. That is a lot of money, man. They will give you tons of money. So there's a lot of different ways that Francis Ngannou can make money out of his contract that kind of oversteps what we all believe he'd be taking in pay-per-view wise.
Yeah, and as far as legacy is concerned, let me tell you this, guys. He's already beaten 5 guys that have worn the UFC strap at one point. One was an interim, the other 4 were undisputed. And if you throw in Alistair Overeem, who's a former K1 Supermax champ, former Strikeforce champ, and Dream champ, I mean, he's beaten a lot of people. There's a legacy there if he were to just bow out and retire. It's unfortunate he won't get to decide the trilogy with Stipe Miocic, who's regarded as the greatest heavyweight ever. Some say it's Fedor, some say it's Miocic. I don't know. And trust me, I really wanted to see the Jones fight, but I think it's a little unfair, and I think people are just jumping the gun here a little on Francis and almost coddling up to Dana White and whatever it is that he says and sells, and it's just not right. Now, there's a few things coming in right here. Some people are asking, is this live? Yes, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. If you're watching right now, it's live. I'll try and take questions, but we move from topic to topic. So if you don't get a chance to get in during the topic, then you're going to miss out. I still got a few more things to ask the guys. If you want to ask about this, I will include you. Guys, let me ask you this. The baddest man on the planet, we knew it as Francis Ngannou when he was the champ. But since then, he has decided not to re-sign with the UFC. Let's be clear. That's how Francis said it. It went down. And John Jones has won the vacant, undisputed title. Who is the baddest man on the planet? If it's still Francis, how long can he hang on to this unofficial title? Mike Vaughn, we'll go back to you again.
I don't know. I guess it depends on the outcome of the fights, right? Like if John Jones goes in there and absolutely smokes Stipe Miocic like he did to Cyril Gane, the argument becomes a little different. But then what if he retires after? And what if by the time Francis Ngannou fights next, John Jones is 4 months into retirement and, doing his own thing outside of the sport, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen at that point. Then I guess it's up for grabs. So it's going to obviously be harder to maintain for Francis over there. It's going to depend on who he fights, the level of competition. I mean, from my perspective, as far as like him going into this PFL debut, obviously I think he can fight almost anyone and we're all going to watch it. The intrigue factor will hook us at that point. But as you go 2 fights in, 3 fights in, how are you going to be able to pull the competition? And God forbid, right, he loses that first fight, then it's going to be really interesting. What are you going to do in terms of selecting the opponent where you can now claim the guy who beat him is the baddest man on the planet? Or is it just going to be someone no one cares about? And they're like, wow, we were right about Francis Ngannou all along. He's 37 years old, hasn't fought in 2 years and coming off a serious knee injury. All the critics are going to be there. So in that regard, this is obviously a risk for PFL and Francis. But I think that first fight, he's going to be able to kind of hold on to that as much as he wants, kind of regardless of what happens to Jones and Miocic. They'll promote the fight as such. They'll promote him as such. But depending on the outcome of, the UFC side and this side, that's where the conversation is going to become murky, I guess.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think Mike nailed it. So if you guys want to chime in, that's fine. But I want to give one again to the chat. DC7, I'm going to give this to you, Danny. He says, can you guys talk about the big obstacle being that Francis is already 36 years old? How many years can PFL get out of Francis with him already not fighting over a year and waiting another year? I think that's a great question. Let's include that here, Danny.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting, and I think to the point that you were asking earlier about the baddest man on the planet, there is something to be said about being active and fighting frequent and being in the minds of the fan base. And for Ngannou, he hasn't fought in a year, and I do think this is fair criticism. And we probably won't see him until 2024. So in my mind, usually if you don't lose the belt, you leave the promotion as champion, I mean, I still see you as number one, but John Jones is going to be racking up wins, I assume, since he wants to be active. So that can certainly shift perspective. But yeah, this is all very interesting. Also, this deal is between 2 or 3 fights. I just wonder how much can PFL get out of Francis Ngannou in 2 or 3 fights, enough to merit all those millions of dollars and that really lucrative contract that they dished out for him. So it's all very interesting. I also want to point out that somebody in the chat, I believe, mentioned it as well. Like DC was fighting for the belt until his early 40s. So like Francis Ngannou being 36 and just being a freak athlete as well. A lot of people just see him as old, but in heavyweight, that's not that old. I can still see him being very prime at 38, 39. I mean, if he obviously stays in shape and avoids any major injuries.
All right, I thought I could put this to bed, but there's a lot of chat still talking about baddest man on the planet. Goes, what do you think, man? They say the UFC champ is the baddest man on the planet. What do you co-sign on that, or is there a process of handing that unofficial title over? I mean, Jones is 1-0 as a heavyweight. We're not arguing his light heavyweight career. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think here?
I think it's a big 1-0, right? Because of what he did to Ciryl Gane. He went in there and made it look so easy. If he were to do that in the next fight against Stipe Miocic, a guy that gets talked about being one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, then I think that conversation keeps up, and I think he's nipping at the heels of Francis Ngannou. But chances are, I mean, a seasoned veteran like Stipe Miocic, I don't think he's going to have that type of performance. And so the longer it takes for John Jones to be in there and beat a Stipe Miocic will probably start to hurt a little bit of that talk. If that ends up being a 5-round decision or something like that, I don't know that we're all jumping down Francis Ngannou's throat, right? It just kind of depends on how he keeps winning. Francis Ngannou being gone for a while, that does hurt because, if you're going to talk about, there's new fans all the time. And if you have to go back years to even reference a guy's fight, that's a hard argument, right? But John Jones is already talking about retirement. So we don't even really know how long he's going to go. Let's say he does come in and beat Stipe Miocic. If he goes away, which is I think what Mike was saying, then yeah, that talk kind of goes away with him at the same time, right? If he sticks around and maybe defeats a Sergey Pavlovich, then yeah, it just keeps going. And I think it will probably get under Francis Ngannou's skin. What Francis has to do is keep winning and keep winning. If you're in the PFL, your wins have to be devastating. Everything, kind of like what he did to Overeem. Those types of highlights, I think that's how you keep that title.
All right. Really quick, Dana White had a reaction to this. He says, I know how this story ends. We have a great story there, article on the MMA Junkie website if you want to dig into it. I'm just going to give you a quick quote here, and then we got to start to move on. But he says, based on what I know about the deal, which is not much, it makes no sense to me. You're going to pay a guy not to fight for a year, and it's already been 18 months. He's fought 3 times in the last 3 years. It's just not what we do here. It's not what we do. The day we released him, we knew exactly what was going to happen. He says, I don't think he's afraid of anybody. It's just the fact that he doesn't want to take any risk. PFL is going to pay this guy to train for a boxing match that may not even happen, and they may not even be involved in. How does this make any sense? It doesn't make any sense to me. Francis, since then, has already fired back. Basically, look, I'll just sum it up. He's like, hey, why can't you just be happy for me? And he points out, different things along the way. He says, I wasn't released. I decided not to resign. You can check it all on Francis Ngannou's Twitter. Again, I'm trying to rush through this because we've covered a lot. We need to move on. But I do want to go to the guys here. Also, he, kind of like what we did here, he went back into the history banks and he pulled an old tweet from from Dana White, where Dana White was basically alluding to John Jones didn't want any of that smoke from Francis Ngannou, who was his champion at the time. I thought it was brilliant on Francis. Regard the internet comes through again. Mike, what did you think of that little tussle between those two on Twitter? Or sorry, I guess at the press conference and on Twitter.
Yeah. Once again, Francis, think being as classy as he can in a difficult situation where it might be hard to be classy. I mean, he'll take his little jabs here and there, but as far as like Dana's comments, I mean, he's doing what he needs to do in his position, right? Like he's not in the business of now trying to promote a former UFC champion who's fighting for the competition, if you want to frame them that way. So I wasn't expecting him to go up there and sing, Francis Ngannou's praises and say how this is a landmark deal for MMA. His idea is to downplay it because he doesn't want other people being like, hey, that's a great deal. Now it's, no, my boss is there saying this doesn't make sense and this isn't a great deal. So, I mean, Dana's just being Dana White at this point. Nothing there surprises me. I didn't expect him to, show a bunch of class in this scenario and stuff like that, which is fine. I'm not necessarily criticizing him for it, but yeah, I mean, this doesn't change too much for me. The toothpaste is out of the tube in regards to the situation, and these guys are just gonna, do what they do.
Mm-hmm. Danny?
Yeah, this is it was interesting to listen to Dana White say those comments, and you have to like parse through everything because I do believe some stuff does have some legs to stand on, and I think it's fair criticism, but a lot of it is promoter talk, as Mike mentioned. What is he supposed to do? Yeah, go to PFL, great offer, they're giving great contracts over there. No, he's going to say quite the opposite. But I did find his criticism around Francis Ngannou's timeline for the PFL to be very fair. Like, look, what, you're just going to sign a guy and wait almost an entire year for him to return after he hasn't fought in a year? Like that is not ideal, right? Like, you want to strike while the iron's hot. You want to strike while, this guy was just champion in the UFC just a few months ago, right? But all in all, it is promoter talk, right? Like, Francis Ngannou got a great deal. This is a huge win for him. And something that he says, like Dana White said about Francis Ngannou not wanting to take risk. Dude, not signing a contract and taking the UFC head on and becoming a free agent, waiting an entire year and seeing what the landscape of mixed martial arts is as a champion of the UFC, that is a huge risk. So, totally not, totally baseless claims there from Dana White. Huge risk taking from Francis Ngannou with all this.
Mm-hmm. He just didn't take the risk he wanted him to take.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think depending on your status in the world, like I'll give you an example. Floyd Mayweather received a lot of criticism throughout his career, but every time they would throw the bait out there, he would take it, he would latch on, and he would not stop talking. And in a way, that kind of shows that you're a little defensive and maybe like defensive, and you don't believe some of these things you're saying. Francis Ngannou has been very short and very sweet, and that's what you look at when somebody is in that position of knowing that they are right and they believe absolutely what they're saying. That's what you got to do. Keep it short and sweet, hit your points, get in and get out. You don't have to sit there and brawl all day online with people. That's just not the way to go, especially if you're the baddest man on the planet. So I kind of applaud him so far. Dana White, he's got to do that stuff, right? Like that's what he does. You know it's coming. But I thought Francis Ngannou did a good job of keeping it short and sweet.
Our producer, Ken Hathaway, does have a clip of that tweet. It's 35 seconds long. Let's take a listen right now at Dana White talking about John Jones about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Man, the idea of a John Jones fight seems awfully exciting right now. And John came out, tweeted, said, "Show me the money." What appeals to you most? Because it seems like that would be an amazing super fight.
If I'm John Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
You think that's a fight that you'd like to put together next? I mean, I know we don't matchmake, but that sure does seem exciting.
Listen, I could sit here all day and tell you, what show me the money mean? I tell you guys this all the time. If you can say you want to fight somebody, but do you really want to?
Okay, so now we get it. Neither guy wants to fight each other.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I say, two sides to the coin. It's just that this is the latest, but it all is on the internet forever. Again, I'm not attacking Jones. I also think he's the greatest of all time. What he did at light heavyweight's incredible. His debut at heavyweight is amazing. But there was a period in time where he just did not want to fight. And you know what? This is fucking topic number. The next one coming up. Let's just move on. The chatters are just gonna have to live with what we've said to this point. But I'm just saying, we come strong over here at MMA Junkie. Y'all need to relax, but you all do have some passion. I've been seeing you guys throwing elbows at each other. Settle down, natives. We're gonna move on here to the next one. All right. On the same day that Big Fran told us that he'd be taking his talents to South Beach, just kidding, the UFC unleashed a barrage of fight announcements, the likes of which we've never seen. All right, UFC 290, the 411 there, they basically reassured us it's Volkanovski versus Y-Rod. UFC 291 on 7/29, July 29th, Poirier versus Gaethje for the BMF title. We got Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Fajeda, Costa versus Ali Skarov. Ferg is back, Tony Ferguson against Bobby Green, Michael Chiesa against Kevin Holland. Even Derek Lewis is on the prelims. This card is so deep. He's got Marcos Rogerios de Lima, Stephen Thompson versus Michelle Pajeda. Pretty sick. I got to give them props for that card. UFC 292 on August 19th. Sean O'Malley challenges Aljamain Sterling for his bantamweight title. Amanda Lemos challenges Zhang Weili for her strawweight title. He also reminded us that Power Slap is back. But guys, I want to know which announcement stood out to you the most. This time we're going to Goes first.
Well, I mean, a lot of fights get announced and you dive into the rankings, you dive into BMF titles, all that stuff. Sometimes I just want to hear what's going to be a good scrap. And for me, that Kevin Holland, Michael Chiesa fight, that stands out to me because I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Both guys give us good fights regardless of who they're facing. Now you're matching them up together. Kevin Holland, you never know what's going to happen before a fight, right? Like, it's just excitement. It's kind of like that video game fight, right? Like, you have no idea what's going to happen. Both guys want to drag the other guy into their world. And for Michael Chiesa, I think it's kind of important. Like, there's a lot of people that look at Michael Chiesa as a broadcaster now. They forget that this dude was a fighter. He's a good fighter. So I think it's his chance to kind of remind people, hey, I'm back. I can be a menace in this division. And Kevin Holland, if he can continue to show improvement, I think fans are starting to gravitate to him. So I think that fight would be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that one.
Chiesa, the only tough champion of the only live season we've ever had. I think they went 13 weeks instead of the normal 6 of filming. That year was crazy. Yeah. How about you, Danny? Which fight did you like?
Yeah, obviously the BMF title fight. To be honest, I don't really care much about the belt, but just Poirier versus Gaethje 2 just sounds fantastic. But I want to give some love to Alex Pereira's debut at 205 against Jan Blachowicz. And the main reason is because I was super bummed out when, he lost to Adesanya, and then they're like, yep, the series is over. The rivalry is over. This is done with. He's moving to 205. And I'm like, wait, no, there's unfinished business here. This is not settled. They're 1-1 in mixed martial arts. They got to have a third fight. So I wasn't really very excited about, Pereira going up to 205. But now that he's actually booked in a fight against the legendary Polish power, I'm super stoked. And then just the type of matchups that are out there at 205, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Also, Pereira hits hard as hell. I can't imagine that his power is going to get even bigger when he moves up a weight class. I feel like he's that type of fighter. So Alex Pereira's career at 205 pounds, I think it's going to be something to watch.
Danny, is it too soon after that vicious KO?
Maybe you could make the argument, right? But we've also seen fighters get, knocked out and then just bounce right back like nothing. This guy is a very experienced fighter. He's a very experienced striker as well. I respect Blachowicz. Obviously, his power is ridiculous, but he's not Adesanya. I feel like if you're gonna find that chin, you got to have a lot of technique behind. And I feel like he should be good here against Jan Blachowicz. At least I have him winning, at least on the odds. So we'll see. I guess time will tell.
Man, last time I checked, Jan Blachowicz packs power too. But all right, I think you're talking about more the accuracy maybe or the skill.
You got to find it, right? You got to find that chin, or what's the power, where does it factor in, right?
Okay. Mike Vaughn, which one did you like?
Obviously, it's got to be Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje, right? Like, this is a fight that we've been calling for since a few months ago. The BMF title twist was something I didn't necessarily anticipate, but this is as good as it gets, right? Like, what an amazing matchup. The first fight between these two was the 2018 fight of the year. They've obviously put in incredible work, only further built on their reputations as two of the great action fighters in the UFC since then. And I think if anyone does kind of warrant a non-title pay-per-view position main event, it's these two guys. And then they throw the BMF title on there. I think that these two, I think they have 24 UFC bonuses between the two. So like, that this is worthy, whether you care about kind of this gimmick belt or not. I like seeing these two guys get honored in a little bit of a way with this matchup, because it's going to be an incredible fight once again. I'm curious about how the elevation factor of Salt Lake City factors into this fight. Obviously, Justin Gaethje spends a lot of his time in Denver training there, and I think that maybe gives him a bit of an inherent advantage for this fight, especially given the fact that it's not that far away at this point, right? Only like 8 weeks. So I don't know what Dustin Poirier's plans are for this camp. If he's going to go out there early, all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping to speak with him later this week and kind of ask some of these questions. But yeah, this is a great matchup between these two, and I can't wait for it. If it's anything even remotely close to their first fight, we're in for an absolute treat on July 29th.
All right, one question for each of you, and then we got to move on. Old school goes. Did the UFC kind of counter program Francis Ngannou's big announcement? Because they came a little bit earlier on a Tuesday. We know that matchmaker meeting's later in the afternoon, but all of a sudden they had all these announcements to unleash on us.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely did 100%, but can you blame them? I mean, Francis Ngannou told them exactly when it would drop. It happens all the time in the music world, movies, video games. Why wouldn't they do that? So, I mean, I can't hate the UFC for doing that.
All right, Danny, I got one for you. Should we be even having another BMF title? I thought it was a one-time thing, a few years ago. Are they bringing it back because they really needed that main event? Just running it back, Poirier versus Gaethje too, that's enough for me. But hey, at the same time, I kind of geeked out when they did the first one, so I probably can get into this one, which might even lead to more subsequent ones. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think they didn't have a title fight ready for that pay-per-view. They usually like having a belt on the poster and just saying, it's a championship fight. So I don't think the belt was really necessary. I feel like fans just look at that fight. I mean, you just have to play the highlight reel from the first fight, and you're already selling that pay-per-view. The BMF title doesn't really add a whole lot to it. Maybe in the UFC's eyes it does, but at least in mine it doesn't. I'm just curious to see how this is going to play out now. Like if a fighter wins the BMF title, it won't be fought for again until they retire, because that's kind of how Dana White placed it. Are we going to get title defenses here? Like what the hell is going on, right? I don't know. That whole thing's weird. And I think he was even asked at this presser for this past fight night, and he didn't really have an answer for it. So I'm not even sure if they themselves know what the long-term plan is for the BMF belt, but certainly interesting.
Well, if anything, it seems like a number one contender belt for this, right? Because you'd have to imagine the winner of this should be
champ versus champ next fight. Champ versus champ.
Yeah, I mean, if they could promote it on a poster with, Islam Makhachev or Beneil Dariush or Charles Oliveira, whoever's the champion at the time, standing there across the guy with the BMF title, it's just more promotional fodder for them at this point.
Yeah, I do got to say, though, if you don't mind me stepping in, George, with Jorge Masvidal retired, Nate Diaz out of the UFC, these are the two best guys to fight for a BMF title, right? If they were to make one, right? We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
What if they did one in 2024? Who's your early lean for that, guys? Can you think of one off the top of your head?
Any division?
Really. Any division, yeah. Baddest MFer on the planet for 2024. You got to have a little gangster side to you. Your fights have to deliver. So we can't just be going, to the chess masters, if you will, the people that win rounds. I mean, we're looking at the blood and guts type guys and gals of the sport. Anyone come to your head?
Man, if he didn't already have a belt, Jamal Hill is the type of guy that you're talking about, but he's already got a belt.
That's true. All right. Well, if something hits you guys, maybe we'll circle back at the end. And chat, feel free to tell us who would you like to see in the next BMF if this becomes a yearly tradition or whatever. All right, moving on. Conor McGregor, he is to enter the USADA testing pool immediately, according to USADA. Here's a quote from them. We have recently been in direct contact with Conor McGregor, and as he confirmed today in the media, we expect to receive his paperwork coming out of retirement and re-entering the USADA testing pool immediately. They continue. Like other athletes who come out of retirement, the UFC anti-doping policy, McGregor will be subject to testing for at least 6 months and must provide at least 2 negative samples before being permitted to compete. The purpose of this rule is to ensure that all athletes who are not subject to the period of testing are adequately tested over a reasonable amount of time before competing to ensure a level playing field for all athletes. If my math is right, we'll call it today he jumped in, then he's free on November 22nd. That means he's too late for New York, but he can compete in December, where the UFC in the last few years has been having a mid-December card in Las Vegas. It's a pretty big one usually. I imagine the Chandler fight is still on, even though the season of Tough is going to run from pretty much starting in about a week till August. So, I don't know if any of that momentum is lost. So how much does this fight matter to you, keeping it together, if they do it? And by the time they fight, what will be the stakes? Because as we mentioned, we'll have a new BMF. We're going to have a new contender in the Oliveira-Dariush match. And by then, Makhachev will have probably defended against one or the two. I know there's a lot there, but I think you guys can figure it out. That's why we came with you three this week and not the mother numbskulls on the staff. There you go.
Yeah, this is going to be very interesting. I think this fight is going to, as far as what's at stake, it's hard to say that the winner here, especially if it's Conor, won't get a title shot just because it's Conor. But I think what's at stake here is that this fight will let us know exactly where Conor McGregor's at, because I feel like certainly we can say that probably his best days are behind him, right? Obviously won 2 belts in 2 different weight classes, but you can't totally discard the idea that he's not an elite fighter still. But I think Michael Chandler is a good test for that. So I think we're going to find out if Conor McGregor is just going to kind of become a money fight and is just going to maybe be in the BMF type of fights, or if he really is good and maybe he goes out there and destroys Michael Chandler, who's obviously very, very solid, and maybe he is title worthy. Who knows? At 155, obviously, I think that's what makes most sense, but it seems like 170, that's a weight class he'd like to compete in. So certainly very interesting. We'll see where this all plays out. But come that fight, I think we're going to find out where McGregor is in the sport.
Yeah, and by the way, I got to include the chat before we get to Mike. They deliver. Sometimes they crack me up, man. Check out Sly756. He says, Justin is a social worker. Dustin's the charity guy. How BMF? Look, it's not like he doesn't have a good point, but I think once they lock the cage, they are BMF. Mm-hmm. That was funny. Skybees and El Daddy says, well, how about Bobby Green versus El Kakui? That's BMF worthy. And he kind of has a point, except this year's BMF is already taken. But anyway, Mike, back to you regarding McGregor and all that.
Yeah, obviously happy to see this step going forward. He's not officially in the USADA program yet. We need to see that documentation and that, first couple tests show up on the website database they have that everyone loves to post. No test shown for McGregor for the last almost 2 years now at this point. But yeah, this is obviously promising. You see the comments out there from people, Conor's never going to fight again, and he's just doing this to promote his Roadhouse movie and his Netflix documentary and all those sorts of things. But it seems like there is actually legs to this now. He's out there in Dublin this past weekend doing interviews, talking about the fight around this Katie Taylor boxing match that he had a hand in promoting. So his head, as much as ever, right? Like he's showing up at BKFC and all that stuff, seems to be very much in the game, but it was like, is he actually going to come back and compete? And we're getting this now. Hopefully the timing lines up. Hopefully these tests come back clean and there's no issues in that regard. And we get the December fight that we've all been waiting for since this was announced. Feels like a long time ago at this point. What are the stakes going to be by then? I think you guys have laid it out pretty well. It's going to depend on how these fights play out, both at lightweight and welterweight. I don't know if Conor McGregor can make lightweight again. I mean, maybe if he does a very dedicated camp and has the proper nutrition, is uninjured and all that stuff, but he seems like a pretty big guy at this point. I don't know if 155 is in the cards for him anymore. So you look at 170 there, how things could play out and all that stuff with Colby Covington and Leon Edwards, and then is Bilal Muhammad actually going to get the next title shot if Conor gets a win? I don't know. It gets pretty complicated here. So it's a Conor McGregor fight by the time December rolls around. If we're getting this on December 9th or whatever the event date will be for that pay-per-view this year, there's going to be a lot of excitement. a lot of hype coming off the show, coming off all the stuff that he'll do to promote it, and the UFC will promote it, and it's going to feel like a big deal. And the questions about title shots in any division are going to be rampant, and we're going to be, the same feeling around there. And a lot of people are going to forget that, he only has one win in the past, 6 years or whatever the case may be. So Conor McGregor is still a special unicorn figure in our sport. And when it comes around, all the rules and ideas of what we apply to everyone else is going to go out the window, and he's going to play by his own rules.
All right, Goes, what say you? December in Vegas, or does he wait till 2024 to stack that nice attempt to get on the Forbes list? You know how that guy's driven.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that does drive him, so I wouldn't be shocked if he had that type of strategy. He's a smart guy when it comes to that type of stuff. But I mean, I think the stakes are kind of high, for everyone involved, right? The UFC, for Conor McGregor, for Michael Chandler. Danny makes a good point in that we have to kind of see where Conor McGregor's at. Like, he's getting older. That's a gruesome injury that he's trying to recover from. And Michael Chandler is the right guy to test you, to see where you're at in that, because he's going to push you in every single way. That guy is good wherever that fight goes. But there are ways of getting advantages in that fight, and one would be if it's at 170. That's a little too big for Michael Chandler, I think. For me, I hope that Conor McGregor can make 155. I think we need that type of fight, that type of payoff. But it's really not looking that way. There's so many hurdles here with USADA, so many things that can kind of take this fight away from us. It kind of makes it scary, because all we do is see Conor McGregor, right? He's in our eyes constantly. Like you guys mentioned, the Roadhouse movie, the Netflix documentary. We're going to see him on Tough with Michael Chandler. If we don't get that fight, and we don't get it in the right state, whatever weight class we all prefer, 155, I prefer it there. It's not going to feel like it had the payoff, and that's going to kind of suck.
All right. Well, Marcus Williams in the chat also shares the same sentiment. He says Conor McGregor will not fight in 2023. But anyways, we got to move on. We got to move to the next one here. Going back to them fight announcements, the champ Aljamain Sterling, says he might not be ready to fight in August. He cites some nagging injuries and the quick turnaround. O'Malley says he's fighting someone for the title in August, kind of dismissing Sterling's presence on the card, if you think about it. Then Dana White guaranteed the fight will be happening when he fielded questions at the Fight Night 224 post-fight. Since then, Sterling tweets, quote, I guess, is that how you do it with Twitter? I don't know. He says, F it, let's run it, July 8th, and see if you're really built like that. And he tags Sugar Sean, ESPN MMA, UFC. Sean O'Malley tweets back, I ain't built like that. See you on August 19th. And then mocks Sterling again a few hours later. Hey, August is too soon. How about July? As if to say that makes no sense. If you're not ready in August, why are you even throwing out July? I think Sean O'Malley got some dubs on that stuff. Anyway, I see a nice little rivalry developing. It can only help the fight night and the pay-per-view numbers, I imagine. Mike, what did you think of this little interaction and what's playing out like this? And in the end, will we get these two in August?
I think we will. I think this fight will happen August 19th in Boston. I don't love the way that we've gotten here for kind of the reasons you laid out. Aljamain Sterling, if his side of the story is to be believed, and I do feel it is, because I believe we had Shaquille, I'm forgetting his last name, from CBS Sports. He was like on the phone with Ray Longo doing an interview when they announced this fight. And he was like, well, we haven't really agreed to anything officially. And then it came out that it was just a verbal agreement, but UFC announced it in a way that seemed like it was 100% set in stone. And that seems a little bit like it was to put pressure on Aljamain Sterling, who understandably the man fought 2 weeks ago. And he said just needs to figure out if his bumps and bruises are good enough. But if he can make the date, he's going to try to make the date, and fair play to him. But it was a little rushed in terms of the UFC getting out the door, but this also shouldn't be a surprise, right? They faced off in the cage at 288, and Dana White said minutes after that August 19th is when he would like the fight in Boston. It just does feel like a big turnaround for Aljamain Sterling. I mean, people out there can talk all the crap about this guy that they want, but he is the most active champion in the UFC right now by a pretty good margin, right? So respect to him if he's going to try to make this turnaround. And I think he will, and I think he sees the opportunity, right, with Sean O'Malley in terms of what this can do for his exposure and probably his biggest payday yet. I know Sean O'Malley hasn't headlined pay-per-views, and he's not that known commodity at this point, but I do see the hype surrounding him and the metrics he gets. And I think this will do a solid pay-per-view number for the UFC and for these guys. So I think it's in Aljo's best interest to take this fight. Just don't necessarily love how he got there. And then this handling of, being like, oh, let's do it in June now, he's saying, as he's like eating ice cream on his Instagram stories and stuff. It's like, okay, bro, just like kind of pick a lane here, say you're getting ready for August 19th. It's not about who's, can be harder over Twitter and things like that and put out the little things that they're doing to tease each other. Just commit to the August 19th date and let's do this. We know it's not perfect circumstances for you, but this is sometimes what the UFC calls upon their champions to do. They have a schedule they need to maintain. They want multiple title fights in Boston, and this is the one they want. So for him, it's pretty clear the UFC is probably going to move on to Henry Cejudo and like an interim title fight or something if he said no. So it's almost like pick your poison to a degree with Aljamain Sterling. So I would like to see him treated a little better. I think he just said something on his podcast that we shared in like our Slack channel where he was basically just like, why can't Dana say, hey, we talked to Aljo, he agreed to the fight. Things aren't 100% perfect right now. He's got some injuries, but like, if he'll be there, he'll be there. If not, we might have to take another plan and be like a little more respectful. But it's instead like, oh, the guy can't get out of his own way. Like, can I explain to you what's going on in Aljamain Sterling's head? Just doesn't feel like the best way to treat your champion, especially one that's being so active for you. So that's what I don't love, but it's kind of been a theme of this episode going back to the Francis Ngannou thing. Dana White has his own style of doing this. And if you've been following the sport long enough, none of it should surprise you.
Mike, is Aljo even more active than Volk and Izzy? That kind of surprised me. I don't like the beef with the stats guy on our staff because you got that down pat for sure. But that one caught me off guard.
Izzy's probably up there for sure, but obviously, he lost the belt, so he was challenging for the title in his last fight as opposed to defending it, and Volk was going up too. So yeah, they've all maintained a pretty strong schedule. These are the guys that are kind of carrying the UFC, but Aljo's being pretty consistent. He just fought, TJ not that long ago either, and just fought Henry, and is now going to fight a few months later. If you get 2 to 3, if you get 3 fights in a 1 year span, I'd say you're up there.
Got it. Okay. All right. Look, here's a few notes, and then I'll turn it over to Goes. Volkanovski, he's going to fight, but he's going to fight like he's going February to July, whereas Aljo's going April to August. Jamal Hill, he won the title before Aljo, and he's not being asked to defend. John Jones won the title 1 month before Aljo. We think he's fighting in November. We wanted it in July, but we think he's fighting in November. And he was barely even in a fight that day. Makhachev, same thing. He won it in February. He's not fighting till October. Israel Adesanya won it. He won it back in April, but looks like he'll probably run it in September when they go back to Sydney, Australia. Leon Edwards is another one. Alexa Grasso, all fought before Aljamain Sterling, and they're not either booked or officially or nothing's even being talked about in terms of their next title defense. So I kind of see Aljo's point there. But anyway, what do you think of this whole thing going on with Sterling, O'Malley, and Dana White?
It's odd. Really when you think about it, Dana White's intent on having that fight. But what does he mean exactly, right? Like Mike alluded to, is it Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley, or could it be someone else? They just love to throw that stupid interim title out, so you never know. I don't blame Aljamain Sterling here. He's done a lot for the company, and right now, if you look at the statistics and the things he's done in his division, he's got a lot on the line. And at the end of the day, as a fan, I would imagine you would want a fair representation of both fighters in this fight. And if he's sitting there saying that to this day he still has pains in his leg from the last fight that just happened, I think he's kind of earned the right to, if he has to push that fight back a little bit, you would think the UFC would want to play along with him for something like that. I want to see this fight. They brought him in the cage for a reason. They got our appetites going. I think it will be a good fight, but at the end of the day, I do want a fair representation of both fighters. I want them both to be healthy. As far as the smack talk's going, man, I'm loving it. And I do feel like Sean O'Malley got a 10-9 there early on Aljo. But when push comes to shove, that fight, I don't know. I kind of have Aljamain Sterling. Sean O'Malley's made some big strides in his game from each fight, and maybe he's made another one. But right now, I think this is going to be a real interesting fight. But I don't blame Aljamain Sterling one bit.
Anakin Skywalker in the chat says Dana wants Sugar Sean to win and be a draw for the UFC, which is probably the reason he doesn't like Aljo. Anyway, Danny, weigh in on the topic. What are your thoughts on everything going on here?
Yeah, I don't know how much more I can add. I think Goes and Mike did a pretty good job at covering this topic. I very much feel the way they do towards it. Aljamain Sterling, yeah, he's one of the most frequent champions defending the belt right now, but he's also the most dominant champion we've seen at bantamweight in a long time. TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, Peter Yan, like all these guys that have been champions in recent years, even Dominic Cruz towards the end of his title run, even Cejudo, they really won the belt, didn't defend it, or were only able to defend it once. And now we're going on, I believe, Aljamain Sterling's 4th title defense here. And also, out of all the names that you had mentioned that had fought before Cejudo, the champions, before Sterling, that still have yet to be booked, I would say that Sterling probably has the hardest weight cut than all of them. So it's like you're making this guy return faster than everybody, and he likely probably has like the toughest weight cuts from compared to all the other champions. So it does seem unfair. And also, it seems he got caught off guard by the announcement as well. I wonder how much the UFC rushed it, since they had the Francis Ngannou news that day as well. So I'm sure they wanted to pack in as many fights as possible to overshadow the announcement a bit. And I don't blame them. Obviously, that's anybody that would be in Dana White's position would do the same. That's what a promoter does to the competition. But yeah, don't like it. I think Sterling deserves a lot more respect. Again, one of the most dominant champions, or the most dominant champion we've seen in recent years. And yeah, he deserves the respect. At least, okay, fine, insist on the date, but make him look good. I mean, that's your job as a promoter. Make him look good at the presser. The dude just fought. We're seeing if he could be ready, like Mike said. But he's a badass. He's gonna turn right back around and fight the #1 contender. I don't know. There's certainly way better ways to put it than the way Dana White did.
Anakin Skywalker is also saying Sugar Sean's taking over next. Meaton says, I think it's an easy win for Aljo. And West Coast says O'Malley isn't winning this fight. So they're already picking sides here in the chat. Chat's blowing up today. I think it's 1-1 going into whatever press conference they have. I think Aljo won the face-off, not necessarily because he said anything or was more witty, but his partner, Merab Dvalishvili, somehow wound up with O'Malley's jacket. So he wins that night. But O'Malley wins the next night with these tweets where he kind of checked them and says, August 19th, I'm calling the shots. Real quick, guys, really, really quick. Who's the A side going into this fight? Is it O'Malley?
That's tough.
In terms of popularity, yeah.
I would tend to agree, but we'll find out how popular Sean O'Malley is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, when you have to throw down for a $90 pay-per-view with his name on the banner.
That's a good point. All right, we're going to move on to the last topic here. So, guys, was John Jones out of line to toss shade at Francis Ngannou when he took time away from the sport and vacated his light heavyweight title in an effort to make more money? So that's kind of what Francis is doing, trying to look out for himself, make more money, standing up for himself against the UFC juggernaut. Plus, he's also been feuding online with Tyson Fury. A little hijacking there of Ngannou's plans? No, I don't know. Has Jones been acting fair or foul, fellas? All right, Goes, you're first.
I think he's fair. I don't think he's out of line. He's doing what he's supposed to do, right? He's trying to elevate his own brand. He's taking advantage of being in the biggest stage that you could possibly be in mixed martial arts. He's got the UFC belt. He's taking advantage of that. He'd be a fool not to poke the bear. But is his reasoning there? Probably not, but people are still going to buy it. They buy it all the time. John Jones can do ridiculous things, and you think he's going to come out and people are going to throw eggs, and instead they're cheering him, right? He's done that time and time again. So I think Francis Ngannou's responses to John Jones have been pretty good. He keeps it short and sweet, right? People need to come to Francis Ngannou, not him come to John Jones. And I think in the past, in some of these feuds with John Jones, he's able to get people to constantly try and come at him. And that's where I think Francis Ngannou is winning a little bit, because he's keeping it short and sweet the same way he is with Dana White. But I don't fault John Jones for attempting this at all.
All right, Danny, fair or foul the way Jones has been acting towards Ngannou and the big deal he signed?
I'm kind of stuck between the two. Obviously, when you got Francis Ngannou leaving as champion, and now he takes over the belt with his win over Cyril Gane. I do think it's fair for him to be out there banging the drum and being like, "No, I'm the baddest man on the planet." Like that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to promote yourself. You're supposed to promote, the company that's backing you and whatnot. But what doesn't sit right with me is that Jones and Ngannou's situation with the contract obviously is very different. One re-signed with the UFC, the other walked away. But the root of their issues with the UFC were the same, which was, they felt like they weren't getting fairly treated, both from compensation and as well, just treatment from the company. So I want to quickly read a 2001 tweet that surprisingly, or maybe not, got deleted from John Jones, but the record is still out there on the internet. So this is what John Jones wrote in 2021. Please cut me already. You would rather have me around and treat me like shit. I swear the UFC industry has been nothing but depressing for me. Just fucking let me go. What type of weird shit this is? Obviously, the boss hates me. Let me take my business elsewhere. So he clearly was ready and down to walk away and take his business elsewhere and, feel appreciated somewhere else, both monetarily and just by the company. Obviously, we saw that clip that Ngannou had tweeted, kind of Dana White, the promoter, throwing shade at the GOAT, John Jones. Now he's in his good graces, obviously, but I just want to kind of say to John Jones, don't forget you were in a very similar position to Francis Ngannou. Now things worked out for you and you're happy with your contract. And, I'm happy that, you got what you felt you were worth. But let's not forget, like you were in a very similar position to Francis Ngannou, but he actually got to walk away. So that's when I say foul. That's when I say foul, because you should understand Francis Ngannou, in my opinion.
Good stuff, Danny. Nice find on that tweet. All right, how about you, Mike? Close things up here on this topic.
Yeah, great answer from Danny and great find on that tweet. And it goes to show, I mean, like I was gonna reference a quote from Jones before Francis officially left, but when he was going through his stuff, basically saying that, I'll never judge another man for doing what he thinks is right for his life. And Francis did the right thing, and then John Jones decided to crap all over him, saying that he's soft and he's running away from the fight and all these narratives that don't necessarily make sense to me. A big difference in terms of what Danny was laying out there too is Francis Ngannou did get to the end of his UFC contract, and he went through all the challenging hurdles and protocols it takes to get to free agency. John Jones, when he re-upped, he still had multiple fights on his deal. He just wanted a better purse for fighting at heavyweight against these tougher challenges, on paper. And that had always been his thing, that, I'll stay at 205 and defend my belt as many times as I need to for this contract. But if I'm going up, I want to be compensated differently. He didn't get what he wanted, and he sat out for pretty much 3 years at this point. So, I mean, for us to sit here, we've all been following John Jones for more than a decade at this point. Since he was like the youngest champion in UFC history. No one should be surprised that he is hypocritical towards his own words, that he, says things that are backwards, that, conflict with previous statements he's made. Like, this is the story of John Jones's entire history in the UFC, and this is who he is, and we're kind of almost used to it at this point, but this is the way he's always been. So I'm not surprised that he went there. I guess to answer the question, was it fair or foul? I guess it's fair, because this is what I expect from John Jones at this point. But some of the stuff is foul in terms of everything Danny laid out there, what position John Jones was in, and now someone else who's going through something somewhat similar. And he's, not, he's being part of the problem and not part of the solution in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think it was foul. I think there's a little bit of a fraternity between these athletes. Yeah, they fight each other, but they root for each other in certain things. And with it being almost identical, you think there just would have been a touch of gloves from one guy to the next. Hey, it would have been nice to fight you, whatever. But instead, the dude just went in another direction. All right, no time for additionals today, but we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for you guys always tuning in Mondays live, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, for Spinning Back Clique, where we unpack all the biggest stories from the week. We will be back next week to do it again. I want to thank Danny, of course, Mike Bond, and Goes, our producer, Ken Hathaway, and our graphic artist, Kamikaze. Of course, you can keep it locked on MMA Junkie throughout the week and check out our socials as well. Instagram blowing up, Twitter, YouTube channel is insane, youtube.com/MMA Junkie video. You might as well hit the like on the video and also the shares, the button, so you're notified of when we're live. We're out of here. Enjoy your day. Go out and be a champion.